Right, so this is the last of the lectures I'm doing for this year. Remember, all the ones since the most recent Inspector Calls one are up on the YouTube channel. If you missed any or need to rewatch any parts of them. And I'm recording this as well today. The thing that I'm really trying to get across here is not so much the idea of what's going to come, you know, in a day's time, because it's not. You've got a week or so to go. It's more thinking, okay, after all is said and done, what is there left for us to do to push that a little bit further? Okay, what is there left for us to do? I'm not going to hugely go over the details of the texts anymore. They're all there. I've covered that. I've done that. It's more thinking about it now as an exam, as 2 exams coming up. And I'm going to rely a lot as well on what we get from AQA, okay, what they say they are looking for. So there's a lot of evidence examples from that. So let's start with the most important thing. If you remember nothing else from today, remember this. Because at the level that you lot in here are, that's the most important thing. Answer the question. Okay? If you answer the question as it is on the page, you can't go wrong. The questions cover every single assessment objective. The questions will focus and make sure you get other things that you need to. And we'll come back to that repeatedly. But every time, the question has to be your God. Exactly what's being said. There are many, many people across the country who will sit down that exam, and partly because of nerves, partly because they can't be bothered to do otherwise in some cases, they will look through and they will see, say, for example, Inspector Calls, they'll see, say, the word Sheila, and they go, ah, Sheila, great, and they'll write all about Sheila. They will not see the fact that it will say, how does Priestley present Sheila as, and then give you a particular opinion about her. We also need to remember, of course, that planning and preparation is vital. It's not just something that people like myself and Miss Telly to do. It is absolutely central to a high level answer. You don't need a huge amount of it, but you need to do it for each question. If you go in straight with what's in your head immediately, you will probably start really well, but it will probably drift and it won't carry on as well. And as you'll see when I say in a minute, you actually need to get better as you go along, not worse. And the other thing to remember, if you remember nothing else, is to give equal time to each section. I was explaining this to some people again earlier today. Yes, it's paper 1 and paper 2, but the reality is you don't want to think of them like that. Paper 1 has 2 sections. Paper 2 has 3 sections. Each section is worth 20%. Macbeth, A Christmas Carol, An Inspector Calls, Power and Conflict, Unseen. There's slight variations, but 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. Don't think of them as separate papers. Think of them as 5 individual sections that will add together to make up your mark. And therefore, make sure you give equal time to each section. That's going to be particularly important in paper 2. 2¼ hours, longest exam you have, but there is not a second to be wasted. You must make sure that in that second paper, by the time you get to the unseen, you still have the full 45 minutes available for it, because it is worth as much, and actually 2 marks more, than an Inspector Calls. Okay? So it's that significant. Okay, pushing on a little bit faster now with this next bit. What makes a high level answer according to AQA? This will not be a surprise to anybody in here, I hope. I call it opening with a clear argument. Other people use the word thesis. Whatever it is, this is what will take you into the higher realms. A thesis that sets out an answer to the question, an interesting idea, and then doesn't just leave it at that point, but develops it from that point onwards, takes it further forward. So if it's a question about Sheila as a character who changes across the play in Inspector Calls, you set out very clearly, what do you think about Sheila's change and why it's there, and what is Priestley trying to do at the opening. And then the rest of your answer is about taking that further forward, developing why he's doing it, looking in more depth at a particular month. That is central. The first line of everything that you do. This, I suppose, is fairly straightforward, but again, highest level people know and understand the text inside out. If for any reason, with a week to go, you don't know Macbeth and A Christmas Carol inside out, there's still plenty of time. And you need to. The best people will be able to dip in and out of both the extract and the whole text as they're going through those two questions all the time to spread their argument. They'll just know where to go. They'll know, oh yeah, this is what happens later on. It will come up and regularly come up, and they will have ideas. I've said many times before, and it will come back again. There is no need for rote quotation learning for this exam. In fact, it's a bad idea. Rote quotation learning gives you a bank of quotations in your head that you will then use, whether they're appropriate or not. And you'll tend to use big chunky quotations too. Not much use at all. What's far more useful, and we'll come to this more detail in a minute, what's far more useful is if you know the text, you can refer to details anyway. You'll just know loads of details, even if you don't know always individual words. They make a point that this is not what a high-level answer looks like. Pre-prepared structures, pre-prepared sentence starters. They particularly say this often appears as tacked-on sentences at the end of a paragraph, like an Elizabethan audience would be, a Jacobean audience would think, a Victorian audience would, or in contrast, a modern audience would. Phrases like that, which you just put in routinely, you can see what AQA think of them. The same, by the way, goes for starting with, in this didactic play, right? You get no marks whatsoever for it. You've clearly taken it from somewhere else. And this develops from what I've just said. They talk about how high-level answers use references quite often, as opposed to specific quotations to support and illustrate students' answers. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not saying they don't use quotations. The good direct quotations are fantastic and really valuable. But there are times when you just want to refer to a specific thing, particularly, you think about Macbeth, it's a play. You refer to something that happened, something we would see, right? Something that will go along. And people who put things in their own words. Christmas Carol. People, for example, who pick out details about the individual ghosts. If it's a response to a question, but they don't remember the exact detail. You might remember that the ghost of Christmas past wears this dress with flowers on, that kind of like flowers from around different parts of the time of the year. So it suggests that Christmas kind of goes the whole year round or whatever. But you want to remember the exact detailed quotation. Who cares? That's as good. You've remembered not only it's a dress, it's got flowers around it, and that's what it means. That's what it suggests. So there we go. There is also plenty of impressive use of direct quotations, but people are aware of that. And finally, this idea of seeing methods as more than language. Okay, I don't think we do this in here, but there are a number of people that I end up marking from across the country who end up really focusing on language, individual. They pick out words, individual words, and analyze them in massive depth. And the trouble is, that's one word in an entire text. That doesn't really mean anything. It's a different kind of analysis. Okay. What we tend to do is look at detail and its impact on a broader thing around it. And it can go further than language. Structure is a very common thing that high ability students look at. And if you think, and if you've been to my other lectures, you'll know that's something I have focused on hugely. The pairing of scenes in Macbeth, the way certain things come back. You know, Macbeth chops off MacDonald's head at the beginning, and he ends up with his head being chopped off. I wonder what that's saying. Does that mean he is now the MacDonald? He's the rebel? You know, things such as that organise and get it. And the structure of Christmas Carol is very, very clear and important as well. Seeing that is far more important in a lot of cases than individual words and phrases. Characterization is the other method that's very, very important. The way that people create characters, particularly in spectacles, especially if you understand it properly. What about errors? Okay, these are the things to avoid. Number of times I sit there marking and I actually have to get out a dictionary of terminology and look up things that people have used because I've never heard them before. I look them up, go, oh, that's what it means. Pretty soon forget it. They don't get any marks for it. This is not something you're marked for, knowing detailed subject terminology. Yeah, and particularly people misusing them and using it inappropriately. If you're talking about the text as a text, you're dealing with subject terminology. This one, and I apologize if this is something you've been taught. I don't think most of you will have done. Theories, quoting theories. A Marxist thinker would, a feminist would say, Freudian interpretations would suggest, particularly bad with Christmas Carol, that one. Even Nietzsche, which is very strange. They're kind of just empty rubbish. Doesn't mean anything, does it? Why are you quoting that? Because you've been told it. I think the bottom line is, if you've been told something and you don't get it, don't understand it, don't use it. And be very careful, read the extract carefully to avoid misunderstandings. Recent one that used that captain's speech at the beginning of Macbeth, a few years back now, 2018 maybe, 2019. Number of people, for example, who used, you know, that term merciless, which, as you all know, is merciless MacDonald, and they used it to describe Macbeth. Now, little things like that will make massive differences to you because it shows you've not read. If it's there in the extract, you've not paid attention. What you do need to focus on instead is the assessment objectives. That's all you're marked for. Yes, there's AO for the SPAG one for a couple of them, but really it's these four here, okay? And they're worth basically a mark each in each level. Okay, remember, you've seen the mark scheme. There's 6 levels. Each one has 5 marks in them. 1 mark is given to you for AO1 task, 1 mark for AO1 refs, 2 for AO2, and 1 for AO3. And that's how we find your mark. Quite simple. It's not a judgment call. It is, where have you achieved each of these skills? So know them and get them right. And understand them. First of all, we've already dealt with AO1 task. Well-constructed response, build an argument, demonstrate understanding. Use of references, AO1 refs. References quite often, as opposed to direct quotation sometimes, it's about the use that is made of the reference, whether it's a quotation or reference. That's what's important. Like I just said to you, for example, that dress with flowers on it, doesn't matter whether you've got a quotation, whatever, it's a detail and you know why it's important. You know why you're using it. That's what we mark. We don't mark the actual reference. We mark what you say and do with the reference afterwards. AO2 is that thing about methods we've talked about there, which can be language and things in there, but it can be structure, can be characterization, anything that the writer chooses to do to gain meaning. And the 2 marks come, what do they do, or what methods they use, how they use the methods, and how does that create meaning? And then finally, AO3. We're pretty good at this school with it, but there are things you will see if you look online where people get this horrifically wrong. There are schools in the area who get this horrifically wrong. First of all, AO3 starts with the word ideas. Context comes in later. So the primary idea, this is direct quotation from AQA, ideas is foregrounded. If you focus on the key idea in the task, you will address AO3. If you answer the question, you will address it. You do not have to worry otherwise. You do not need bolted on contextual information. If that information is helpful, great. But telling loads of people about King James's book on demonology or whatever it's called, who cares? All that shows is you've read it somewhere or been told it. What's it got to do with the question? Why are you saying that? If you're just saying it to show that people believed in witches, just say people believed in witches. It's in the text, isn't it? Macbeth believes in witches. So why do you need to prove that anyone else does? Anyway, that is now, put those together, and that's the fundamental thing that goes on, right? Right, just very, very quickly on this, because I've dealt with this before, and I look around the room, and I'd say about 75% people in here I have taught at some point anyway. So I've probably mentioned this to nearly everybody in here anyway. And I know a lot of your teachers will have done as well, because I've told them about it. But if we start with this idea of the assessment ladder, I mentioned it to you before, whatever. I'm sure I've drawn this recently. Oh, I obviously haven't, otherwise it would be up here. That's you. That's the ladder of assessment. Okay. There's all the different levels. Oh no, I've not put 6 on. There it is. Okay. At the start of every single one of these, you start at the bottom. As you carry on, you climb the ladder. Right? So as we see you achieve those assessment objectives on each of those levels, level 1, remember, is simple. Level 2 is some. Level 3 is attempts to. Level 4 is clear. Level 5 is thoughtfully developed. Level 6 is perceptive. So as you do all of those for those assessment objectives, you move up the ladder. And it's a one-way ladder, so you can't get back down it. Frightening if it's a real ladder, but very good in this metaphorical case. So if you achieve level 3 or level 4 quite early on, you know, and then the rest of it is a load of trash, you've still got that level 4. You can't lose it. Okay? So that's how we do it. Think about that as you go along. And what that helps with is this thing, which is still up here from God knows how long ago I wrote it. This format, don't worry if you don't understand it. It's just something I often talk about. Something but something idea for your assessment, for your answer at the beginning, for your thesis at the beginning. Where the first thing is your clear, straightforward answer. And then that but allows you to go deeper into it. And of course, as you know, being a montage, it allows for endless bad jokes about butts. But it keeps you entertained. You know, stick your butt in there. Your butt's very important. The bigger the butt, the better. You know, that kind of an idea. You can have fun with it as much as you like. But the point is that what that does is it means the first point that you're making, this one here, is secure. For a lot of you, about level 4 standard in here. Yeah. So you kind of securely do everything nice and straightforward. If you're talking to Sheila, you've got her change across the play. You've shown me, yeah, great, brilliant, wonderful, lovely. Then about halfway through, you move on to your second point. You think, right, I've got those marks. I'm pushing now. Now I'm going to go a little bit further. Now I'm going to go for the more interesting stuff. You see, what about the idea that Sheila has always been that way? What about the idea that she doesn't change at all? All that actually happens is that she brings out what was inside her in the first place. This is the time when you might be tentative. You might be saying, it seems this way. It comes across, not it could be. That's just saying maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, you know, getting across. But then again, you might go different sides. However, it does suggest this. That might work there. Okay. Right. How are we doing in terms of time? Just a couple of, no, actually, I'm going to move on to the next slide here first. Right. Just to make sure we get through it. Okay. So 5 texts 5 individual things to remember. 5 ways from the head of me of going at it without actually messing things up. Right, okay. Macbeth, when you're answering Macbeth, tip number 1 for you, answer the question for the whole play first. Don't think start with this extract. You'll see this if you've been with me. You see that question at the bottom, starting with this extract, how does Macbeth show Lady Macbeth to be evil? Right, so you cross out, start with this extract, and you just think, okay, across the play, how's she evil? That's your starting point. That's your thesis. Start with the whole play, then come back to it. Mold the extract and the whole text together as you go, rather than doing blocks. Extract, whole text, extract, whole text. Right? That's how you get to a higher answer. Move between the two of them. You're writing something about the extract, and it makes you think of how the whole text has worked together. You think about the structure. You think how it's built up to this point. Bring it in. Go for it. Here we go. I love this one. Avoid obvious and unhelpful quotations. What do I mean? Why use that quotation? What's the point? Everyone remembers it. That's why. Why use unsexed me here? What does it tell you? It tells you she wants to be unsexed. And it also gives an opportunity for some people to think she wants to be a man, which is, of course, completely wrong. No. Get rid of unsex me here. If you wanted to make a point about her desire to be feminine, so not to be feminine or anything, to change from that, why not take this one? You can say a lot more about that. Unsex me. That's a quotation, by the way. I'm not just exclaiming that suddenly in the middle of the thing here. But taking my milk away. The milk, what does the milk do? It gives life to people. What does gall do? It poisons people. She wants to take her life-giving stuff and replace it with poison. You've got so much more to say there than unsex me. Don't just use quotations that are obvious. Use quotations that are helpful or references that are helpful. I said before, consider the structure of the play and remember it's a drama. Talk about watching it, hearing it. The audience, we would see this, we would find this, we'd notice, the juxtaposition of these two things happening would make us see the two together. Think about it, talk about it from that point of action. A Christmas Carol, almost everything the same. Everything the same I just said, because it's the same kind of question. Okay? But additionally, again, don't forget the structure of the novella. It's very clear. Stave, 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 stave. And this staves. Weirdly, they say chapter on the exam paper. I don't know if you ever noticed on past ones. But they're called staves. You can use that. Remember, it's a carol. Staves of music. But use the structure. Use the way it works. The pairing up, how that goes go there. Talk about the narrator's role and technique. That was my Christmas Carol lecture before Christmas, was it not? I think was about the role of the narrator. The way it was part of that anyway, the way that we can look at the narrator as a character, the way he makes comments and involves himself. There's a good way of stretching yourself a little bit further. What about an inspector calls? As we said before, this is the one where you don't get anything imprinted in front of you. Every other one of these, you have something printed. These two, you get the extract. Here, you get the poem, first poem. Here, you get the poem itself. This is the only one that's completely blank. They know that. They don't expect masses of quotations. They expect to know lumps of the play off by heart. And in fact, believe you me, because this is my paper, one thing I hate is people quoting massive chunks of text. Kind of pointless. Just quote an individual word or an idea or something there. References are as effective. And be careful with the references you use. You know where I'm going. Sheila is not immature because she uses the word money. She's a middle-class girl. I was working with someone who's a middle-class boy the other day, and he said, "Mummy, is he immature?" No, he wasn't. It's a rubbish example. For one thing, Sheila isn't immature anyway at the beginning, as far as I'm concerned. Although you can argue that if you like, it's your argument. she's completely not. But if you were going to argue that, there was much better things for you to look at. Much better. And then you know it's coming. If you've been to anything I've talked about before, the bloody Titanic. I would go as high as 80% of all Inspector Call's answers. If it's relevant in any way, we'll use the bloody Titanic quote. Have you ever watched any of these productions of it? They cut it out. It's not very interesting. It's not very important. If you want to show him making a fool of himself, what's much more important? The war. I've told you this before when we talked about him. The war. He says there won't be any war in front of an audience who are sat there who've just lost half their family in a war and their grandparents in a war before that. They're going to hate him. Far better than a bloody ship that goes down. Honestly. Sorry. Titanic annoys me. If I wasn't a nice person, I would mark down anybody who uses it, but I can't, and I wouldn't do that anyway. Right. Now, this goes with everything, but particularly Inspector Calls. Make sure you know where your references come from. Again, I lost count of the number of people last year trying to write something about social class or whatever it was, and they were using Mrs. Burling, and they used that thing about girls of that class. Right? Now, we all know why they use that quotation. It's because they've been watching those videos that we don't talk about. But they all seem that loads of them wrote about it as though she says it at the beginning of the play. Right? Okay, sorry, no. Yeah, at the beginning of the play. They got completely the wrong idea of where she's saying it. Know where your references come from. Make sure you get it right, otherwise it can get your whole idea wrong. And of course, don't forget it's a drama, same as with Macbeth. Think of it that way. Think of the dramatic moments. Great one with Sheila, if Sheila does come up. Think of her reaction. Imagine seeing that on stage. She gets wound up, the photograph comes in front of her. Not only does she run out of the room, remember, she stifles a sob. Like she's trying to hide it. Runs out the room, within a page, she's back. And she's back saying, so I'm responsible. That is the moment of full change for her, full kind of realization. Dramatically, we'd see it that way. And be careful of generalizing about characters, particularly at the start, inaccurately. We had Eric a few years back, and that led to the constant use by a lot of people of, at the beginning, Eric does everything his father tells him. No, he doesn't. He challenges him directly. And Sheila, at the beginning, she's an immature little child. I don't think she is. Prove it to me if that's what you think. Don't generalize and think you're right. Okay. Power and conflict. I said this to you over the last 2 weeks on our power and conflict lectures. Big problem people do is they just write about the poems. Stay focused on the question, stay focused on overall argument. My advice always is this. There are two things in the question you can't change. You can't make any choice about. You have to deal with. One is the named poem on the page. Two is the topic that's there. So if it is individual responses to war and poppies, you have to write about poppies and you have to write about individual responses to war. So deal with those two first. Think, okay, what is the individual response to war in poppies? What individual response are we being shown? Get that clear in your head, then choose your secondary poem. Don't jump in and go, oh, individual response to war. Oh, I could use remains there because I like remains. Look at the poem, look at what you're going to say about the first one, and then bring in a second poem that compares well to that. Use comparison, comparative language when you're dealing with that second poem. And think of them as poems. Just as we said, think of them as drama. These are poems, poetic techniques, their impact, structure. Look at them as poems, crafted in their way as they are. And my other tip to you is always consider the endings of poems and their effect on meaning. I would really strongly suggest to you that you never write a response about power and conflict poems without bringing in the last line. Okay, Unseen poetry. You're very confident about unseen poetry, aren't you? You all feel happy about that? No, of course not. But it is actually slightly the most of any section. You have to pay attention to it. And you need to use planning and preparation appropriately for it. It's really, really important that you use the time effectively. You've got to get that right balance in looking at it and going through. But at the same time, remember, it's appropriately. There's no point covering this poem with annotations and picking out every little bit. You're going to write 20 minutes on it. You're not going to use that stuff. So what's the point in absolutely covering it and then making yourself rush and hardly writing about anything? What's far more important is to think about the poem as a whole. You won't have to work out what it's about. Remember, it's in the question. The question tells you what it's about. And the question not only tells you what it's about, it tells you what they want you to write about that it's about. So there's no, work this out idea, but think about it as a whole. And that probably will mean that it kind of progresses. It starts one place and then it will develop and change. Often two kind of halves to the poem. People know, I often look at the middle of the poem. If there's like 7 stanzas, I'll be looking at stanza 4 and thinking, is that the most important? I bet it is. A pivot for it to turn on or something. But don't think that you have to throw in and spot techniques. That's not what it's about. It's about answering the question. And in 27.1, the question is about AO1 and 2. It's just those ones. It's about answer the question. Use references from the text and talk about the methods. That's what it's looking for. So deal with that. You can't deal with the whole poem. No one wants you to deal with the whole poem. You're going to give a sense of the poem as a whole, but you can deal with individual bits that work together. But I tell you what looks really good and what really works well is if you don't deal with them in isolation. Think about where they are in the poem and connections and patterns and changes. Whereas in 27.2, remember the most important thing, it's very short. It's AO2 only. If you compare what is happening in the 2 poems, you will not get a mark. It will be ignored. And I tell you that as someone who marks them. If you compare and say, oh, they both use snow this way, they both write about snow, and that nothing will be marked. You've got no marks at all for it. You're comparing how they do it. Method. Compare the way they use imagery. Compare the way they use endings. Compare titles. Compare the way they use narrative voice. Whatever. Compare method. So here we go. Zip, zip, zip. Final. AQA's advice for candidates. This is what they print on their examiner's report from the most recent ones here. This is what they say to you. This is for high ability as well, particularly. View the questions as an invitation to show your understanding. They want you to tell them what you think. Read the question carefully. Clearly identify what it's asking you to focus on. Sheila, as what? Ideas about what? Think carefully what you think the writer is showing you about that. Answer the question. Make sure you've read it accurately. Make sure you're answering the question you've chosen rather than one you wish was on there. Read the extracts in paper 1 very carefully. They're there to support your response. It's valuable to place the extract in the context of the text. Know where it comes from. At what point? What happens before or after it? Or both? Which characters are involved? How is it linked to other parts of the text? This is what they're looking for. Take time to construct the answer. As we said, start with a thesis, a broad argument, and go from there. Select details from the text which support what's there. They don't have to be just quotations. They can be references. Methods, as we've said before. The use of language and technique, sure, but also structure. The order of events. The order of events is a method. Juxtaposing events. Characters as conscious constructs, contrasts, or even foils to other characters, etc., etc. Think about why the writer has written the text. Why have they done this? What do you learn from it in a broader sense? The best way of approaching the study of a literary text is what, how, why. Essentially. Notice the why is, has the writer written this text? What ideas are they exploring? That kind of thing there. Okay, look, there's loads of paper too there, but I haven't got time to go through it with you. I will leave it up there in a minute. But remember, if you remember nothing else, it's those three things. Answer the question, plan and prayer, give equal time to each section. I'll leave that up there if anyone wants to look at that. Just go in there and be you. Be the brilliant person you are. No problem.